The tennis world was still catching its breath. Eala had already done the impossible. She had slayed world number 2 Elena Rybakina. She had dismantled 20-time WTA title winner Alina Svitolina. She had beaten players that, on paper, she had no business beating. And she had done all of it in the same week, on the same grass, in a tournament she had entered on a wild card. But standing between her and a place in history was a ghost from her recent past. Linda Noskova. The Czech star had humiliated her just months ago. A 6-2, 6-0 defeat at Indian Wells, the most lopsided loss of Eala's professional career.
Noskova had not just won that day.
She had been surgical, ruthless. She had won 78% of her first serve points, fired 7 aces, and barely given the Filipino a moment to breathe. Eala had walked off that court with her head held high, but the memory had lingered. It was a loss that had exposed the gap between where she was and where she wanted to be. Now, on the grass of Berlin, with a spot in the final on the line, the 21-year-old from Quezon City didn't just want to win. She wanted revenge. What happened on center court that left 25,000 fans gasping and an entire nation celebrating? And how did Eala turn the biggest grudge match of her career into the most stunning victory of her life? Berlin, Germany. June 20th, 2026. Steffi Graf Stadium. The grass at the Steffi Graf Stadium had witnessed history this week. 3 giants had fallen. 3 statements had been made. And now, as Eala walked onto center court for the biggest match of her career, she carried something heavier than a racket. She carried a scoreboard that had haunted her for months. 6-2, 6-0. Linda Noskova had handed Eala the most lopsided defeat of her professional career just months earlier at Indian Wells. The Czech star had dismantled the Filipina with surgical precision, winning 78% of her first serve points, firing 7 aces, and barely giving Eala a chance to breathe. Eala had walked off that court with her head held high, but the memory had lingered. It was a loss that had exposed the gap between where she was and where she wanted to be. Now, on the grass of Berlin, she had a chance to close that gap. Standing across the net was the same player who had humiliated her. But the court was different. The surface was different. And Eala was a different player. She had arrived in Berlin as a wild card ranked 35th in the world. She had already dismantled Donna Vekic, the streaking Queen's Club champion. She had stunned world number 2 Elena Rybakina in straight sets. She had outlasted 20-time WTA title winner Alina Svitolina in the quarterfinals. 3 top 10 victories in 4 days. A ranking that had already climbed from 35 to 31. A nation that had stayed up past midnight watching her every move. But this was different. This was personal. Noskova had arrived in Berlin with her own momentum. The 8th seed and world number 13 had been ruthless in the quarterfinals, dispatching Paula Badosa 6-1, 6-3 in just 68 minutes. 8 aces. 7 break points saved. She was confident. She was dangerous. She had beaten Eala before, and she knew exactly how to do it again. The 2 players walked onto center court. Philippine flags waved across the stands. The chants of Laban, fight, echoed across the historic Steffi Graf Stadium. But for a moment, Eala's eyes drifted to the other side of the net. She remembered the scoreboard at Indian Wells. She remembered the feeling of helplessness as Noskova's winners flew past her. She remembered the long walk off the court, the silence in the locker room, the quiet determination to never let it happen again. That was then. This is now. She bounced the ball at the baseline. Once.
Twice.
3 times. She looked across the net at the woman who had handed her that scoreline. And she made a promise to herself. Not today. The first serve was a statement. Eala's lefty delivery screamed down the tee, painting the line before Noskova could even react. The Czech, who had dominated their last meeting, suddenly looked like she was facing a different opponent. She was. And the match was about to begin. Berlin, Germany. June 20th, 2026. Steffi Graf Stadium, center court. From the very first point, Eala dictated play. Her left-handed angles, the weapon that had frustrated every opponent throughout her grass court campaign this week, immediately neutralized Noskova's power. The Czech's ferocious ground strokes, the same ones that had dismantled Badosa in the quarterfinals, were consistently redirected, pushed wide, forced into errors, rendered harmless. Eala's movement on grass was fluid, almost effortless. She read Noskova's shots before they left the racket, gliding into position, cutting off angles, robbing the eighth seed of time and space. The first set was a masterclass. Eala broke Noskova's serve early and held with authority. The Czech, who had humiliated Eala at Indian Wells with that brutal 6-2, 6-0 scoreline, had no answers. The relentless pressure forced error after error. The first set was over in 34 minutes. 6-2, the same scoreline Noskova had handed Eala in their first meeting. But this time, the roles were completely reversed. The revenge had begun. The second set was a different story. Noskova, the world number 13 and 8th seed, refused to fade. She had arrived in Berlin with momentum, and she was not about to surrender without a fight. The Czech found her rhythm. Her powerful ground strokes finally started finding their mark. She broke Eala's serve, leveling the set at 3-3. The stadium held its breath. Was the comeback on? Was Noskova about to remind everyone exactly why she had dominated their last meeting? Was she about to expose the same vulnerabilities she had found at Indian Wells? Eala walked to the baseline. Her expression was unchanged. She bounced the ball 3 times, her eyes locked on the service box. She had saved 3 break points at 0-40 to close out her match against Bekic. She had come back from 4-1 down in the first set against Rybakina. She had signed a waiver when the WTA flagged fitness concerns just to stay in the draw. She had done all of this in the same week, on the same grass, in front of the same crowd. She could do this. She broke back immediately, then held serve with authority. Noskova, who had been on the verge of something, suddenly looked unsettled again. Eala's lefty angles were relentless. Her movement was flawless. Her composure was unshakable. And when the final point landed, a backhand winner that kissed the sideline, Noskova's racket dropped to her side. The scoreboard read 6-2, 6-4. Eala had done it. She had avenged the most lopsided defeat of her career. She had advanced to her first ever WTA 500 final. She had beaten 4 top 20 players in a single tournament: Bekic, Rybakina, Svitolina, and now Noskova. And she had done all of it on a wild card, on debut, in a tournament she had never played before this week. The Philippine flags exploded across the stands. The chants of Laban shook the Steffi Graf Stadium. 25,000 fans rose to their feet, their voices united in one sound. And Eala fell to her knees on the grass, her face buried in her palms, her tears falling onto the court she had just conquered. She had done what no Filipino tennis player had ever done. She had reached a WTA 500 final. She rose to her feet, her eyes still wet, her smile wide. She waved to the crowd and acknowledged the Philippine flags that had waved furiously throughout the match. Then she walked to her team's box where her coach Joan Bosch was already waiting with outstretched arms. She embraced him. Then she reached for her phone. She dialed her father. The phone rang. He answered. And she screamed, "We're in the final. We're in the final." Her father's voice crackled through the speaker, barely audible over the roar of 25,000 people. But those close enough to hear made out his words. "I'm so proud of you." Eala pressed the phone to her ear, her hand trembling. "I'm still shaking," she would later admit, her voice still carrying the disbelief of the moment. "And I was shaking on match point too. It could have gone either way." There were really tight moments. Berlin, Germany. June 20th, 2026. The numbers behind the victory. The final score of 6-2, 6-4 told only part of the story. Behind that deceptively simple line of numbers lay a statistical masterpiece that left tennis analysts scrambling for superlatives. Linda Noskova had arrived in Berlin as world number 13 and the 8th seed. A player who had dispatched Paula Badosa 6-1, 6-3 in the quarterfinals with 8 aces and 7 break points saved. She had beaten Eala before and she knew exactly how to do it again. But on the grass of Berlin, she had no answers. The difference came on the return. Eala consistently put pressure on Noskova's serve, forcing errors and converting break points with ruthless efficiency. Her movement on grass was fluid. She read Noskova's shots before they left the racket, gliding into position, cutting off angles, robbing the 8th seed of time and space. The numbers from her quarter-final win over Svitolina had foreshadowed what was coming. 19 winners. Only 9 unforced errors. A ratio that spoke of near-flawless execution. Against Noskova, the pattern continued. First serve percentage, elite. Break point conversion, clinical. Ability to raise her level in the critical moments. The difference between a competitive match and a complete statement. What made this victory so significant? 3 things. First, the revenge. Noskova had handed Eala a 6-2, 6-0 defeat at Indian Wells that had lingered for months. This time, Eala flipped the script. The 6-2 first set was the same scoreline Noskova had handed her, but this time the roles were reversed. Second, the streak. 9 wins from 10 matches on grass this season. 4 top. 20 players beaten in a single tournament. A first-ever WTA 500 final reached. Third, the statement. Eala had proven that her Indian Wells defeat was not a reflection of her ceiling. She had adapted. She had improved. She had shown that on grass, she was a completely different player. The revenge was complete. The statement had been made. But the work was not done. After the match, Eala spoke about Noskova with nothing but respect. She's an amazing player. One of the players to beat. I'm happy to be able to share the court with her again, and I'm happy to get this win. Then came the words about what was next. I'm not thinking about the final yet. I need to rest. I need to recover. And then I need to be ready for whoever is across the net. The final awaited. A showdown with either world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka or number 4 Jessica Pegula, both of whom would be the biggest test of Eala's young career. But the stakes went far beyond a trophy. A victory would make Eala the first Filipino to win a WTA 500 title, the highest-level tournament victory ever achieved by a player from the Philippines. It would push her ranking into the top 30 for the first time in her career. A milestone that would change everything. But the rankings, as important as they were not the only motivation. Every time I step on the court, I'm playing for the Philippines. That's what's always in my mind. That's what drives me. And then one final line. Quiet. Steady. Said with a small smile that carried the weight of everything this entire week had been about. I'm not done yet. One more match. One more win. That's all I'm thinking about. From a wild card entry to a WTA 500 final. From a 6-2, 6-0 humiliation at Indian Wells to a 6-2, 6-4 statement in Berlin. From a first-round exit in Paris to the biggest match of her life. The cracked courts of Quezon City. The years at the Rafa Nadal Academy. The fitness concerns advisory she signed a waiver to overcome. All of it had led to this moment. All of it had built the player standing on that grass with a phone pressed to her ear and tears on her face, and 25,000 people on their feet around her. Win or lose in the final, Eala had already accomplished something no Filipino tennis player had ever done. But she wasn't satisfied. The trophy was gleaming. The final was waiting. And the 21-year-old from Quezon City, who had been handed a wild card and quietly expected to disappear by round 2, was one win away from making history. Laban always. And the biggest match of her life was already waiting. This is Tennis Unfiltered. If this week has moved you, if you've been watching every point, staying up past midnight, screaming at your screen, subscribe and tell us in the comments. Can Eala win the Berlin title? And who do you want to see across the net in that final? We'll see you there.